Live NFL trivia every Wednesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge for a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. One of the greatest debuts by a wide receiver in NFL history came on September 21st, 1975, when on opening day of the brand new season, the Denver Broncos hosted the Kansas City Chiefs. And during this game, the world got introduced to a fourth-round pick out of Minnesota by the name of Rick Upchurch. In a 37-33 victory, Upchurch had quite the introduction to the NFL, catching 3 passes for 153 yards and a touchdown, as well as running for a 13-yard touchdown. Up until 1982, Upchurch was the only player to ever have at least 140 receiving yards in his debut, and that game was a sign of things to come, as Upchurch finished his career with the Broncos as a 4-time Pro Bowler and as a member of multiple All-Decade teams. But in 1982, there was another man who did this. There was another man who burst onto the scene and out of nowhere joined Upchurch as the only man to have at least 140 receiving yards in his first game. And unlike Upchurch, this game was not a sign of things to come. This game was a complete fluke, because the player in question only played 2 seasons in the NFL and never even scored a touchdown. Yet he had one of the greatest debuts in NFL history, and perhaps the most surprising debut of all time, considering what we know now. And this is the story behind that. Today's video is brought to you by Hero Wars, a pearl in the ocean of mobile games. Hero Wars is an online role-playing action game with a variety of PvP and PvE modes. Here, I can fight against powerful bosses and experience the story. I started playing Hero Wars, and I'm having a lot of fun with this campaign style, as it feels like a classic fantasy game. While completing missions, I can collect loot and upgrade my champions. This game has more than 50 unique heroes, and each one has unique abilities. Combine and assemble different teams to battle in the arena or traverse the Endless Tower. But the main party happens online, where you can create guilds, fight with other players, and consistently rise in rank. Join the game now and get a super chest with a secret hero, as well as 62 emeralds and 30,000 gold. Hero Wars is available on mobile devices and also runs in a web browser. Scan this QR code or download the game from the link in the description, and I'll see you in the game. Before I talk about the debut, we need some context to understand who this player is, and why he was even getting the chance to play in the first place. The main character in our story is a man on the New York Giants by the name of Floyd Eddings. Eddings got his start playing college football at the University of California. I could not find any Cal football footage of Eddings during this time, so we're stuck with just clips of him from the pros. However, Eddings was a solid receiver, who on some bad Cal teams, knew how to find the end zone and use his speed. He finished inside the top 10 of the Pac-8 or Pac-10 in receiving touchdowns 3 times, accomplishing this feat in 1977, 1978, and 1981. And in 1981, as a senior, he had his best season yet, recording a career-high 17 receptions for a career-high 383 yards and a career-high 4 touchdowns. However, when the 1982 NFL Draft rolled around, there were 35 receivers taken. None of them were named Floyd Eddings. Not a single player from Cal got taken, and Eddings was one of the many who went undrafted. If he was going to continue his football career at the professional level, he was going to have to prove himself as an undrafted free agent. He signed on with the New York Giants, a team that, on the surface, needed some help at the receiver position. Despite making the playoffs in 1981, the Giants were 24th out of 28 teams in passing yards, and ranked second to last in yards per attempt. Only one other player on the team, Johnny Perkins, had more than 500 receiving yards that year. In terms of his chances of making it onto a pro roster, it seemed like the Giants were a good landing spot for Eddings. And it seemed like Eddings was impressing the coaching staff in camp. He seemed like he was going to make the team, and maybe even compete for some playing time. However, during one practice, he suffered an eye injury, and was dealing with double vision. The injury sidelined him for a month, and the team placed him on injured reserve. Then came the strike, which paused play throughout the league for 2 months. It seemed like even though Eddings was trying, he couldn't catch a break, and by the end of November, he had yet to see the field. But little did he know that he was on the verge of getting a golden opportunity to prove himself. After Eddings was inactive for the first 3 games, the Giants activated him for their Thanksgiving Day matchup against the Detroit Lions. Eddings did not play a single snap, not even seeing the field on special teams. The same thing happened for their 5th game of the 9-game season against the Houston Oilers, where in a 17-14 victory, Eddings was active but never got any playing time. We were now in the middle of December, and Eddings had played a grand total of 0 snaps, which obviously is never a good thing for any player to be dealing with. But during that game against the Oilers, starting wide receiver Johnny Perkins got poked in the eye. He was having a solid season up until that point. In his last 4 games, he had 324 receiving yards, and would have been on pace for nearly 1,300 yards if this was a regular 16-game season. However, this eye poke derailed things quite a bit. Perkins had to go to the hospital, and would be unable to play in the team's next contest against the Philadelphia Eagles. While this meant that John Missler was moved into the starting lineup to take over for Perkins, everyone else below them moved up as well. Now, Eddings was going from a player who hadn't played a single down to a player who was the next man up and was going to get some playing time in Perkins' absence. In the week leading up to the game, head coach Ray Perkins told Eddings to be ready, because he was going to play for the first time ever. And Eddings was extremely nervous about this. He said that he's always hyper, and that his mind tends to blank out at times. Even before the game, he was stressing out. He was struggling to learn the playbook, as he routinely had meetings in his room with other wide receivers, including Ernest Gray, where he would learn the plays. And during pregame warmups, Eddings, not knowing where he was supposed to be, followed the captains to lead the warmups. When Dave Jennings, one of the 4 captains on the team, asked Eddings what he was doing, Eddings responded by saying, "I don't know." Eddings was excited, but was a bit of a nervous wreck. And now, after weeks of sitting on the bench, he was about to play in his first game ever. The end result? One of the greatest debuts of all time. December 11th, 1982. Week 14, or technically Week 6 of the strike-shortened season. We've got an NFC East rivalry matchup on our hands between the New York Giants and the Philadelphia Eagles. Not that divisions mean anything in 1982. This is an absolutely monumental game for both teams. For the Eagles, they sit at 1-4. Because 8 teams make it, they're only a game out, so they still have a shot at getting into the field for the 5th straight season. However, a loss would practically end their season and crush all of their hopes. As for the Giants, after an 0-3 start, they enter this game on a 2-game winning streak. A win here to put them at 500 lets them control their own destiny heading into the final 3 weeks of the season. This was a Saturday afternoon contest, so this was a nationally televised affair. And in front of the whole country, the Giants kept their momentum going and won it 23-7. It was a completely dominant performance by the Giants, as they had 19 first downs compared to 9 for the Eagles and had 353 yards of total offense compared to 198 for the Eagles. But if there was an MVP from this game, or a big reason why they came out on top, it was this man right here. It was the man that had never played a game before, the man who didn't really know the playbook, the man who had to be calmed down throughout the week because he was too hyper, and the man who didn't know how to warm up. It was none other than Floyd Eddings himself who took the game into his own hands. Scott Bruner threw 5 passes in the direction of Eddings, and Eddings caught all 5 of them. All 5 of these catches were for at least 15 yards, and a few of them came in critical 3rd down situations. 2 of these catches were longer than 40 yards. For some perspective, entering this game, which again took place in the middle of December, the Giants had 2 pass plays all season that went longer than 40 yards. Eddings had 2 of these in 1 game. When the game ended, Eddings had 148 yards receiving. Only 1 other time during the season at that point did a Giant receiver have over 100 yards. Eddings was the man of the hour. There was no doubt about it. He had an incredible game and a debut to remember. And when you put the game into the appropriate historical context, it gets even more impressive. Here's a list of just some of the things Eddings accomplished with his debut, besides the Rick Upchurch stat I mentioned earlier. He became the first player in NFL history to have at least 5 receptions and 140 yards in his very first game. He was the 3rd rookie in Giants history to have at least 140 yards in a single game, joining Ernest Gray, who had 169 yards in a game against the San Francisco 49ers in 1979, and Bob Tucker, who had 150 yards in a game against the St. Louis Cardinals in 1970. And he was the 2nd leading receiver from a yardage standpoint in the entire NFL that week, as the only player who had more was Broncos wide receiver Steve Watson, who had 183 yards in a win over the Los Angeles Rams. This also meant that Eddings was the leading receiver in the NFC. In the span of one incredible performance, Eddings went from a no-name undrafted free agent to one of the biggest storylines in the NFL. And after the game, all the talk was surrounding his incredible play. Wide receiver Johnny Perkins, who said that he was good to go next week as his eye was better, said that Eddings didn't have to do a whole lot to get better. As long as he settled down, he was going to be in a good spot. Eddings said that he was shocked at his performance, saying that he felt good and was pretty lucky getting this opportunity to come into the game in the first place. And Eddings was incredibly reserved in his celebration. He went out to dinner, had a beer, and then was asleep by 11 o'clock. As Eddings said, "I'm not much of a party person. I think I slept through the celebration I should have had. But I'm still on a high now." Even though Perkins was better and was back in the starting lineup, Eddings, with his incredible speed that made him a track star in college, and with that added dimension to his game that not too many players on the team had, got some more chances to play throughout 1982. But what's bizarre about this entire situation is that Eddings, outside of this debut, did next to nothing in the NFL. In a video I did a year ago, I talked about Cleveland Browns running back Larry Mason, who had 133 yards and 2 touchdowns in his debut, and then never scored a rushing touchdown again. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. And as it turns out, Eddings was more of the same, because he burst onto the scene with the best game of his career, and nothing even remotely comparable followed. Eddings played with the Giants until 1983, and posted rather unspectacular numbers. After that Eagles game, he had 23 receptions for 358 yards and no touchdowns. While head coach Ray Perkins seemed to like Eddings a lot, when Perkins left the Giants to coach at Alabama, Bill Parcells did not hold Eddings in that high regard. Parcells and the coaching staff were frustrated with his injury problems. Injuries were a big reason why he went undrafted, and were a big reason why he eventually fell out of favor with the Giants. He missed a good chunk at the start of the 1983 season on injured reserve, had a hamstring injury later in that season, and missed part of training camp in 1984 with a thumb sprain. Those injuries, combined with an underwhelming camp, led Parcells and company to cut Eddings prior to the start of the 1984 season. As a side note, if you want to learn more about that 1984 Giants team, then click the card in the upper right corner. In his debut, Eddings had 5 catches for 148 yards. If you told someone, particularly a Giants fan, after that game that he would never score a touchdown in his entire NFL career, I think they look at you like you have 4 heads. Yet that's exactly what happened. In fact, it's crazy just how much of his production came in that one game. He had over 29% of his career yardage from that game, and had roughly 18% of his career receptions from that game. If you were to pick a random yard that he picked up in his career, you'd have a roughly 3 in 10 chance at picking a yard that he had in his debut on December 11th, 1982 against the Philadelphia Eagles. The career of Floyd Eddings was a bizarre one to say the least. He was an undrafted free agent that seemingly out of nowhere had a debut on national television that put his name on the map, and then did nothing else and couldn't even find the end zone. His career just goes to show you the unpredictable nature of the NFL, and how on any given Sunday, anyone can have their moment and take advantage of their opportunity. Even if it didn't amount to too much long-term success, Eddings definitely made the most of his chance in 1982. And for Giants fans who were around at the time, they remember Eddings close to 40 years later as one of the greatest one-game wonders in the history of the National Football League. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL Trivia and win cash prizes, link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9, and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.